Alright class, this is the second day of inverse trig. This has composites as well. I have some things, if you want to pause the screen to write down. Remember that sine inverse and tangent inverse go between negative pi over 2 and pi over 2, which are quadrants 1 and 4. And cosine inverse gives you an angle between 0 and pi, which are quadrants 1 and 2, and this should actually be equal to. Again, I did a unit circle. I did 2 quadrants here to help me with cosine inverse. And from there, let's try a couple examples. It's very similar to what we did yesterday, but with composites. So the first thing we got to look at is the sine of the cosine inverse of root 3 over 2. So what you got to do is focus on the inside one first and figure out what angle is a cosine of root 3 over 2. Well, it has to be in quadrant 1 or 2. It's going to be in quadrant 1. And root 3 over 2 is when you're at pi over 6. So this turns into the sine of this whole thing just turned into the angle of pi over 6. So now this is like a problem from last unit. What is the sine at pi over 6? Or what is the y value, the y coordinate? Well, if you know your unit circle, you should be able to tell me that that is 1/2. Alright, so we're just kind of going backwards and then answering. So again, tangent inverse has a 1 at a pi over 4 reference, but we're in quadrant 4. So since we're in quadrant 4, it's negative pi over 4. Now I want to know what the so that would be kind of right here. Now I want to know what the x value is if we're down at negative pi over 4. Well, x value is still positive here. Remember, all students take calculus. So that means it's the same thing as what the x value is at pi over 4, which is just root 2 over 2. And if you think you know these guys, you can pause and try a bunch out for you. This one's a little trickier. We have a root 2 over 2, which is a pi over 4 reference, but it's in quadrant 2. So again, if we look at our unit circle, the pi over 4 reference in quadrant 2 is 3 pi over 4. So this is asking for the cosecant at 3 pi over 4. Well, basically this is asking for the sine at 3 pi over 4. So the sine at 3 pi over 4 is root 2 over 2, which means the cosecant then, you just flip that, is 2 over root 2, and we can leave it like that. Alright, this one, I don't know what's going on with the parentheses here. This is different. Notice how these last two are a little different because we are starting with finding out what the trig function is. So I need to know what the cosine at 11 pi over 6 is. Well, if you go to 11 pi over 6, that's in quadrant 4. It's actually kind of written up here. It's almost all the way around, but it's a pi over 6 reference. So, because 12 pi over 6 is 2 pi. So cosine of that would just be root 3 over 2. Now we need to do our sine inverse of root 3 over 2. And if you think about that, sine is root 3 over 2 up at a 60-degree reference, or pi over 3. Alright? The last one, what is the tangent at pi over 4? Well, tangent is just y over x, which they are the same at pi over 4, so we get a 1 for that. And then we have to do the sine inverse of 1, which means that what angle is the y value 1? Well, if you think of your unit circle, the y value has a value of 1 up here at pi over 2. And that's that. So those are our answers. So this one ended up giving us angles. These three ended up giving us trig values, trig ratios that we were dealing with last chapter. So, okay, so that was day 2. Pretty quick. Again, you really need to know your unit circle, so keep practicing with that. And then if you have questions, please come in for help. Thank you.